My name is Christine Beggs. I'm a senior education advisor, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., in the Office of Education at United States Agency for International Development. And I'm really happy to be here today, and I want to thank UKCDS for engaging us in this panel. It's really very kind of timely and relevant, given that there's a number of us donors from the international that are working in the education sector across many countries, in London this week at a donor working group meeting on building evidence in education. And so this is really kind of, very nice example of what we're trying to do to work together, work across our countries, and kind of broaden the community of practice and engage in building evidence for the education sector. So really timely and relevant. I want to start by, I'm going to just cover 4 points briefly. I'm going to start by discussing a little bit about the USAID education strategy, and it's critical in talking about our research agenda because it pretty much frames not just the way we invest in our programs, but also our research agenda and the way that we operationalize that. And then I want to speak a little bit about, within our education strategy and the focus areas, some examples of areas of interest and why we're interested in those. And then more broadly, how we're operationalizing our research agenda. And then just talking about how to engage with USAID and our funding opportunities at a very general level. So, is this the right one? Okay. So the USAID education strategy is from 2011 to 2015, and this was actually one of our first agency strategies under our current administration, with a huge emphasis on a couple of things. One, focus, really, really high focus, selectivity in the type of programming we're doing and our investments, and then also measurable results. And so the education strategy, being the first strategy, has been very highly visible, both within our administration and also our funding from Congress. And the education strategy is framed by 3 goals. The first goal is focused on improving reading skills, and yes, you're reading correctly, for 100 million children by 2015. And the goal 2 is really focused on tertiary and workforce development. It's kind of evolved since the initiation of our education strategy to focus very heavily on youth and youth workforce development, because that's a critical issue in a lot of the countries in which we partner. And then also our third goal is about increasing equitable access to education in conflict and crisis-affected environments. So I see a lot of parallels to the other kind of education agendas that were discussed in terms of the focus on reading, learning more broadly and quality, but then recognizing that there's still this kind of unfinished agenda around access, and there's still, upwards in the high 50 million kids that are not in school, many of which are in crisis and conflict-affected settings. So in terms of our research agenda, we have a full research agenda associated with each of our goal areas. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of critical points. So when we're looking at our early grade reading, actually, if you could say our research in this and kind of the foundational work for our research started actually before our education strategy. And we have a strong emphasis on assessment of reading and looking to advance open data and transparency and starting the policy dialogue about the status of learning and the status of quality of education within our partner countries. And one of our central tools in this effort is called the Early Grade Reading Assessment. It's an oral reading assessment that's a 15, 20-minute assessment meant to be very adaptable across languages and easily integrated into low resource settings. It was originally developed both with World Bank and USAID and piloted in 2007, I think in Senegal and the Gambia. And since then it's been implemented I think in over 50 countries and 80 languages. We have some countries that are using the EGRA tool simultaneously in 11 different languages, as we've seen a lot of, especially countries in sub-Saharan Africa, kind of going back to local languages for early instruction in primary school. So it's proven to be a really central foundation for our work in early grade reading because it's brought visibility to the crisis in quality. It's allowed us to engage in policy dialogue. It's allowed civil society in our countries we partner with to recognize, the issue and really focus the attention on quality. And we are currently working, in fact, in partnership with the bank also, to make the actual raw data associated with all of the EGRA assessments that we've done, where we have agreement from our country partners available on the EdStats World Bank website. And we also have all of our findings. It's everything that USAID does is public. So, and I'm happy to post the links later or give those to UKCDS to share. So I think that I just want to bring this up because it's very foundational, and we use it for not only policy dialogue, but looking at the impact of our programs. We run a lot of now impact assessments focused on reading and looking at the improvement over time due to our programming. We also, there's a couple of other areas in early grade reading, but I want to touch on one that, you know, we see in the U.S. and the evidence in the U.S. is very strong around the impact of parental and community engagement. And, you know, this would be an example of where here it's almost kind of like, I don't know, using a better term, settled science, if you will, that it's accepted that parental and community engagement is critical for quality and success in education. And, you know, we're looking at operationalizing a research agenda around that in developing countries where low resource settings, where you have, you know, families that don't have an education background, and to see if this is, in fact, is something that adds value in a way that's cost effective, because for us, scale is really important, and to be able to find those ways that we can scale our programs. Our second goal, which again I mentioned, is focused on youth workforce development. We have a really nicely defined research agenda on here that again is kind of informed by our programming. We're seeing emerging evidence, for example, that is indicating that maybe some of the non-cognitive, kind of non-technical skills might be some of the more important skills when it comes to youth and their employment opportunities and their mobility across jobs. And so, because, again, all of our programming is focused within this frame of our strategy, we're able to do evaluations with different treatment arms and looking at nuances of these different kinds of sequencing of interventions and different levels of intensity of different interventions. And this is a really critical part for us because we program so much in workforce readiness and kind of the socio-emotional, non-cognitive skills. And then, you know, in addition to kind of make the case, we've talked about kind of looking at results and the value for money pressures and understanding how our programming in youth workforce development is connected to the broader economic growth of the partners the countries that we partner with. And then just briefly too, I wanted to mention in our equitable access goal, we're really focused on looking at kind of alternative programs that sometimes are necessary where the formal system has either been, you know, disrupted by conflict or crisis, or you have population mobility, and where you have to look for these alternative models and really getting focused on, and this is a very new area of research. I don't think there's a lot of evidence about it, but accelerated learning programs, non-formal remedial programs, what are the best models, and also what kinds of transitions are students making out of these programs, whether either back into employment or back into additional education or employment. And then I just want to mention too, the relationship between school safety and access and learning is also really critical, and a lot of anecdotal evidence, and it's kind of intuitive, but there's not a lot of robust evidence. I just want to mention three things that are important across our research that we're trying to integrate into everything. And this is the issue of cost effectiveness. We can understand what the impact and the outcomes of programs are, but when you apply cost to it, it changes the picture entirely. We've seen things where there's kind of a minimal impact on something, but if it's a very low cost intervention, the impact can be, the cost effectiveness can be nearly infinite. And so given the scale that we work at, everything we do, we want to do with a vision towards being able to integrate it into country systems and bring it to scale. We have a strong emphasis on putting cost effectiveness, collecting comparable cost data, and building these things into our evaluations. And then, again, linked to scale and sustainability, we're really trying to build a lot of both prospective and retrospective analysis around scale and sustainability. So looking at critical factors and success for scale and sustainability, whether it's the policy environment or again, cost and those kinds of things, and local capacity. And then the last point I want to make, and this is really I think important for the research community and something we're trying to stress, is the transparency of implementation fidelity. when we are documenting our programs and writing up our evaluations. Because I find, when we try to do meta-analysis or analyses of evaluation write-ups, very often you can look at it and you're almost hard-pressed to figure out what the intervention was, much less what the fidelity of the implementation was and how that varied, especially in fragile environments where we recognize you're going to have variations in that. And so I think the critical point there is that we don't want to be taking findings from assumptions made about what was actually implemented and what the fidelity was of the implementation. So again, this is something we're really trying to stress as we commission our research. I think this is my last or second to last slide. In terms of operationalizing our research agenda, the agency has an agency-wide evaluation policy and just kind of an unprecedented commitment to evaluation and research, both in terms of resource and visibility. We have a good alignment with our investments and our research agenda, so we're able to do a lot of applied research. We just awarded centrally out of my office, out of the Office of Education, a contract with a ceiling of $27 million over 5 years to do rigorous impact evaluations aligned with Goals 1 and Goal 3 of our strategy. So I think we'll see a really solid, very strategic program coming out of that. And then we're also supporting communities of practice with our partners, other donors, again, framed around our education strategy. But this is to really bring together people who are focused in the same area, develop really well-tuned research agendas and common metrics, indicators. There's a lot of opportunities here. And we also obviously are working with the bank and DFID and now UNICEF on co-chairing the BE2 working group, which is important to us. So the central question for the evening, which I saw from the agenda, which I can't get to any specifics about, I apologize, but I wanted to offer this. These are some resources, and again, we can put these links up on the UKCDS site, but these are the areas where you can go to find out what kinds of funding opportunities and solicitations have been offered by USAID. And the third point is just kind of a little bit of a primer about working with USAID and our processes and our review and selection processes.